The flame flickers. Not from wind, there is no wind down here. The oil lamp in your hand sputters, the glow shrinking to a pale blue whisper. You're 50 feet underground, crawling through a passage barely wider than your shoulders. Dust coats your throat. The air feels thick, heavy, wrong. Sweat rolls down your spine, but it's not from heat, it's cold sweat. Something has changed, and every instinct you have is screaming that you need to move, but you don't know which direction. This is the nightmare of ancient mining. Not cave-ins, not flooding. Something far more insidious, the danger that cannot be seen. Air that looks perfectly normal but carries death in every breath. Oxygen slowly vanishing. Invisible gases pooling in low spots. The kind of threat that gives no warning until your lamp starts to die. So here's the question most people never think to ask. How did ancient miners work underground for hours at a time without electric fans, without oxygen meters, without respirators or alarm systems or any of the safety equipment we take for granted? How did they survive? The answer will change how you think about the word primitive. Most people imagine ancient miners as desperate, expendable laborers, reckless men sent into holes with nothing but torches and prayers. That assumption is wrong. Not just incomplete, wrong. Archaeological evidence from mining sites across the ancient Mediterranean, from Roman Spain to Egyptian copper workings to Greek silver operations, reveals something far more sophisticated. These weren't death traps operated by people who didn't know any better. These were engineered environments. The miners who worked them understood air, its movement, its weight, its dangers with a precision that would impress modern safety inspectors. Survival underground wasn't about luck, it was a discipline. Part engineering, part routine, part ruthless, unsentimental risk management. And understanding how they did it means understanding something most people miss entirely: the physics of underground air. Let's start with what makes a mine deadly. The first threat is oxygen depletion. You don't feel it happening. Your body doesn't have an alarm for slowly vanishing oxygen the way it does for choking or drowning. The air simply becomes less capable of sustaining you. Your muscles weaken, your thoughts slow. By the time you realize something is wrong, you may not have the strength to crawl back to safety. In an enclosed tunnel with no fresh air circulation, a single oil lamp can consume enough oxygen in a few hours to make a space dangerous. Add a second lamp, add the breathing of the workers themselves, and that timeline shrinks dramatically. But it gets worse. Those lamps don't just consume oxygen, they produce smoke, carbon particles, fumes from burning oil. The deeper you work, the more that haze accumulates, layering in the still air, coating lungs with every breath. Ancient miners didn't have a name for silicosis, the lung disease caused by inhaling fine rock dust, but they knew it existed. They'd seen men cough blood. They'd watched colleagues grow weaker over months and years, their breathing becoming shallow, their working lives cut short. The dust was a slow disaster, invisible and patient. Then there's the heat. Deep mines are hot. The further you descend from the surface, the warmer the rock becomes. This geothermal gradient was as true in antiquity as it is now. In poorly ventilated passages, body heat and lamp heat compound the problem. Men working hard in confined spaces can raise the temperature quickly, and high heat accelerates exhaustion, dehydration, and the body's demand for oxygen. Ancient authors describe miners emerging from deep galleries drenched in sweat, desperate for cool water and open air. And finally, the threat that terrified ancient miners most there was what they called bad air. Pockets of gas that accumulated in unworked galleries, in low spots, in dead-end tunnels. Some of these gases were heavier than normal air and would settle in depressions like invisible pools. A man could descend into a hollow and collapse within seconds, overwhelmed by something he never saw. Ancient writers described these phenomena with fear and awe. They didn't understand the chemistry, but they understood the effect. Enter the wrong space, breathe the wrong air, and you never return. So how did anyone survive this? The answer begins with the simplest and most powerful tool in the ancient mining engineer's arsenal: the ventilation shaft. Picture a Roman mining complex in the hills of Hispania. The main gallery descends into the earth at a gentle angle, wide enough for ore carts, lit by lamps mounted on the walls. But every few hundred feet, A vertical shaft rises to the surface. These aren't access points, they're far too narrow for a man to climb comfortably. They're breathing holes. Designed specifically to let the mine exhale, warm air rises. This is basic physics, understood intuitively by anyone who has ever watched smoke climb from a fire. Inside a mine, the air warmed by lamps, by body heat, by the friction of work itself, becomes lighter than the cooler air above. It rises. If there's a vertical shaft overhead, that warm air escapes through it, creating a pressure difference. Cooler, fresher air is drawn in through the main entrance to replace what's been lost. The mine becomes a breathing system, inhaling through the lower opening, exhaling through the upper shafts. This is called the stack effect, and ancient mining engineers exploited it with remarkable skill. Archaeological surveys of Roman mines reveal ventilation shafts placed at calculated intervals, their positions chosen to maximize airflow through the working galleries. Some complexes had dozens of these shafts, turning miles of underground passages into a single, slowly circulating system. The miners didn't need fans. They had physics, heat differential, pressure gradient, the invisible machinery of convection, working tirelessly without any moving parts. But the stack effect only works if the layout cooperates. A dead-end tunnel traps air. A gallery that descends too steeply can pool heavy gases at the bottom with no way to flush them out. Ancient mine designers clearly understood this. They built their passages with deliberate rises and falls, creating step-like progressions that kept air moving in predictable directions. They avoided configurations that would create stagnant zones. Every tunnel was part of the larger system, and the system had to breathe. Here's what most people don't realize. Air underground doesn't behave the way it does on the surface. There's no wind, no weather. Movement depends entirely on temperature gradients and pressure differences created by the design itself. Ancient miners learned to read these gradients not with instruments, but with fire. Watch the flame. An oil lamp burning steadily tells you the air is moving. The flame leans toward the draft. It dances slightly, fed by the circulation. But a flame that shrinks, that dims, that turns blue at the base and begins to gutter, that flame is warning you. Oxygen is thinning. You are consuming air faster than it's being replaced. The lamp will die before you do, but not by much. This was the early warning system. Experienced miners taught new workers to watch their lights constantly. A healthy flame meant safe air. A struggling flame meant retreat. No arguments, no hesitation, no negotiation. When the fire says go, you go. And here's something that might surprise you. Ancient miners didn't just rely on passive airflow. There's evidence that some operations used controlled fires at the base of ventilation shafts to accelerate the stack effect deliberately. A fire burning at the bottom of a shaft heats the air dramatically, forcing it upward at higher speeds, pulling replacement air through the galleries with much greater force than body heat alone could generate. This technique appears in ancient descriptions of mining and metallurgy, referenced by authors who wrote about the dangers and methods of underground work. It wasn't merely observed, it was engineered, deliberate, a tool in the miner's arsenal. Some mines may have used physical barriers to direct airflow as well. Cloth screens stretched across galleries at junction points. Wooden doors that could be opened or closed to redirect circulation toward active work areas and away from exhausted zones. The evidence for these features is fragmentary cloth and wood, rarely survive millennia underground, but the principle appears in later medieval mining texts, and the physics would have been available to any ancient engineer, paying close attention to how air moved through connected tunnels. Water, too, played a crucial role, not just for cooling, but for controlling the invisible threat of dust. In dry tunnels, every strike of a pick sent stone particles into the air. Every ore basket dragged along the floor raised clouds of pulverized rock. Without intervention, this dust would hang in the still air for hours, coating lungs, reducing visibility, turning every breath into gradual damage that accumulated over years. Ancient miners learned to wet the walls, to splash water on the floors before work began, to soak the rock face before striking it. The water bound the dust, kept it from becoming airborne, and cooled the passage in the process. In mines with access to water through natural seepage, pumped channels, or aqueduct systems feeding in from the surface, dust suppression was systematic and routine. Workers would rotate through, wetting surfaces before the cutting crews arrived, maintaining moisture levels throughout the shift. The practice served multiple purposes at once: cleaner air, cooler temperatures, and rock that sometimes fractured more predictably when saturated. But here's the trade-off that rarely gets mentioned. Every ventilation shaft is a structural compromise. Cutting a vertical hole through overlying rock creates a weakness. Too many shafts, too closely spaced, and you risk collapse. The surface above becomes unstable. Rainwater infiltrates more easily, eroding walls and flooding galleries. Maintenance becomes a constant burden. Ancient mining engineers had to balance airflow against structural integrity, deciding how many openings were enough to keep the air breathable without turning the mine into a crumbling, unstable honeycomb. This is where the discipline of ancient mining becomes visible. It wasn't just about building systems, it was about managing competing risks, understanding that every solution created new problems, making calculated choices where the wrong decision could bring disaster down on everyone's heads. Consider the work rhythms. Modern mining operates in long shifts with mechanical ventilation forcing fresh air into even the deepest galleries. Ancient mining didn't have that luxury. Archaeological evidence suggests that work in deep, hot galleries was organized in shorter rotations, teams entering together, working intensively for limited periods, then retreating to fresher air zones before the atmosphere degraded too far. This wasn't weakness or inefficiency. It was survival engineering applied to human endurance. Experienced foremen, men who had spent years underground and lived to tell about it, would monitor conditions constantly. They knew which galleries ran cool and which ran dangerously hot. They knew which passages collected bad air after rainfall, which drained quickly after wetting, which required extra lamps to draw a proper draft. This knowledge was passed down through practice, not written manuals. A new worker learned by watching, by listening, by being corrected before mistakes became fatal. There were rules. When to work alone and when to move only in groups. How to retreat if a lamp began to fail slowly, steadily, never running, never wasting precious breath on panic. How to recognize the early signs of heat exhaustion or oxygen deprivation in a colleague before they collapsed. How to drag an unconscious man toward fresher air without getting trapped yourself in the process. Underground, panic was as deadly as the gases themselves. A man who ran consumed oxygen faster. A man who got lost in the darkness died alone. Now, picture this. A crew of miners pushes into a new gallery. The copper vein they're following has been producing good ore for weeks, and the foreman wants to extend the working face another 30 feet before breaking to shore up the walls. The air has been acceptable. The nearest ventilation shaft is perhaps 200 feet behind them, but the draft has been steady enough. Then someone notices the flame. It's shorter than it was an hour ago. The color is shifting, orange fading toward blue at the base. The chamber has grown warmer, the air heavier. No one says anything at first. There's still work to be done, still progress to be made, still a quota to meet. But the older miners exchange glances. One of them lifts his lamp high, watching how it burns. The flame leans, sputters, steadies again. Not dying, not yet, but changing. The foreman faces a decision. Retreat now and lose the day's momentum, hours of travel time wasted, the crew's energy spent on nothing, the schedule disrupted. Or push forward another hour and risk hitting a pocket of bad air, risk the flames going out entirely, risk men collapsing in a tunnel too narrow and too dark to carry them home. This was the hidden economy of ancient mining. Not just ore and labor, but survival calculations made in real time, underground, by people who understood that the margin for error was often measured in minutes, not hours. The good foreman retreats. He knows that dead miners don't dig ore. He knows that a mine filled with corpses becomes a tomb, useless to everyone above and below ground. The discipline isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for heroic stories. But it's why some mines operated for generations, producing wealth across centuries, while others became graveyards within years. And this brings us to the twist that changes everything you thought you knew. The real marvel of ancient mining isn't that men were tough enough to endure terrible conditions. Toughness doesn't solve oxygen depletion. Courage doesn't clear carbon dioxide from a dead-end tunnel. What kept ancient miners alive was the system itself, the engineered environment that transformed a hole in the earth into something that could sustain human life for hours at a time. They used physics. They used heat differentials to create reliable airflow. They used water to suppress dust and cool overheated galleries. They used controlled fire to accelerate convection when the natural draft wasn't enough. They used the careful layout of their tunnels to prevent stagnation and encourage continuous circulation. And they developed human systems shifts, rotations, hierarchies of experience and authority to ensure that no one worked beyond the limits the air could support. The mine was designed to breathe, and the men who worked it understood that design intimately, even if they could never have written a physics equation to describe what they observed every day. We look at ancient engineering and often see only what's missing: the electricity, the machines, the digital instruments. But that perspective blinds us to what was brilliantly present: observation, adaptation, and a profound working knowledge of natural forces. Ancient miners didn't need oxygen meters because they had the flame. They didn't need electric fans because they understood the stack effect and built for it. They didn't need written safety protocols because they had a culture of survival transmitted through practice from one generation of workers to the next. The air underground is invisible. The dangers it carries are invisible. But the solutions were visible in every vertical shaft, every wetted wall, every carefully positioned gallery, every cautious foreman calling the retreat. Somewhere in the hills of ancient Spain, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, men descended into darkness every day to pull metal from the earth. They carried fire in their hands and hard-won knowledge in their heads. They understood that the tunnel around them was not just rock, it was a system, breathing in and out in a rhythm they had learned to feel, keeping them alive only as long as they respected its limits. Most of them never saw their names recorded. Most of them lived and worked and died without anyone writing down what they knew. But their engineering survives. The shafts still rise to the surface. The galleries still show the careful planning of men who understood air, pressure, heat, and the quiet physics that meant the difference between a productive day and a disaster. The next time you feel uneasy in a stuffy room, remember this: you have the instinct. You can feel when the air is wrong. Ancient miners felt it too. The difference is that they built entire systems to respond to that feeling. And those systems, quiet, invisible, elegant in their simplicity, are still teaching us something about survival, about engineering, about what it means to work in a place where the danger cannot be seen. There are other stories buried underground. Stories about water, about fire, about the strange economics of darkness and depth. Perhaps we'll go looking for them next time.